Namaskar Bengal, Kemon Ache. I am Anjani Raipit and I serve as the Senior Vice President here at IIMUN, and I welcome all of you to IIMUN's West Bengal Digital Edition. A very good evening and welcome to the surprise element of the day. In order to welcome the guest for this surprise element, let me call upon someone very special. He is a former international chess player, an author, a guest lecturer, managing partner of Clarent Group of Companies, co-founder of Taking India Forward Foundation, and president of our very own organization IIMUN. Here's presenting to you Mr. Rishabh Shah.
Today I'm joined by somebody really special. He was former Additional Solicitor General. He was also Minister for Communications, IT, Law, and numerous portfolios. He was Minister of Earth Sciences, Science and Technology, and the list goes on and on. He's also India's finest and also, may I add, one of the most expensive lawyers that the country has had. And he's promised me, just like the last interview, if the last interview went well, he said, I'll fight one case for free. This time he's given a promise of fighting 5. But it is a pleasure. It is, on a more serious note, it is a pleasure to be able to talk to one of the finest public intellectuals in our country, Mr. Kapil Sibal. Thank you, sir, for joining us.
Thank you.
So I want to talk to you first about a very contentious issue, the issue of the farmers' protest, actually. So I wanted to know what your opinion on the subject area in terms of the farmer issue was, because I mean, at the end of the day, Ashok keeps mentioning that we've lost about 3,500 crores every day. We're losing, as much as the farmers keep protesting, every single day we're losing 3,500 crores. And so the Congress in its original manifesto also had one market system in its manifesto. You all specifically mentioned in the 2019 manifesto about the APMCs being abolished. And now all of a sudden, and many of your critics and many journalists keep asking this on national television, and even young people across, that why is the Congress opposing something that in the first place that they proposed? So your thoughts?
Well, first of all, I think that every reform process, there has to be a methodology in taking it forward, whatever reform it may be. And to reform the farm sector in India, which impacts about 60% of the population of India, because India lives in the rural areas, you need a thought process that goes into the complexity of the issue. Something said in the manifesto is an idea that we want to realize. How to realize it, in what manner to realize it, what steps should be taken, requires study, which is why when the matter was placed in Parliament by this government, we said, please refer it to a select committee so that we can call all the stakeholders, decide how to move forward, right? We don't deny the fact that in our manifesto too, we had an idea of doing this. And I don't want to have a tu meme game. But if you just heard Mr. Modi oppose it in the most virulent terms, I think you should be asking him that question as to why he opposed it. But I don't want to go into that. These protests are not by politicians. These protests are by farmers. Farmers in Punjab and Haryana, whom the Food Corporation of India actually procures most of the food grain that they produce, say 40 to 45%, which goes into the public distribution system and is then given to the weaker sections of society, right? Now, over the years, they have been encouraged to produce more. Why have they been encouraged to produce more? Because they've been promised that they will give them a higher price, which is much higher than the market price. Right? Now, even in Punjab and Haryana, you will find that about 60% of the farmers own less than 1 hectare of land. Right? So they actually depend on the land for their daily sustenance. They fear, and this is their fear, that if the corporate sector comes into the picture, they will have nothing to fall back on. Now, at the moment, even in the village today, there is a system of security. If a poor farmer needs money for his daughter's marriage or, other daily expenditure, he relies on the Artiya. And the Artiya then supports him in those difficult times and then takes his grain, right? At somewhat lower than the market price, right? And sells it. And Mr. Modi wanted to protect the Artiyas when he opposed this reform promise, when we proposed it. So all that I'm saying today is, this is highly complex. It needs a roadmap. It needs to set up infrastructure like agriculture, farmers, producer companies, right? It needs mandis to come to the farm instead of farmers going to the mandis. And once you have that infrastructure in place, then we can all move forward. But I think the key issue here is that this government always takes decisions and then decides what is to be done because of the protests. If you remember, the
demonetization program.
What happened in demonetization? He said, everything, just give me 50 days, everything would be fine. So he took a decision, and then he realized that, look, he never thought through it. The same thing with the GST, even though it was our proposal, but they had a multi-layered GST, which still hasn't worked. And the same thing with farm bills. Why would you have to have ordinances? You should have brought the bills in Parliament. We would have heard the farmers. We would have tweaked the bills. We would have tried to protect everybody. And over the years, lay the necessary infrastructure to realize the vision of the country and the vision of the farmers. That's my opposition. My opposition is not to the concept.
It's more to the process and less to the concept. The fact that there have been certain things that they've just missed out on and certain things which they've not consulted people on. And which is why, in your opinion, it's a half-baked bill.
No, not just that. Not just that. The infrastructure has to be laid in place, like the GST.
Right.
How could the poor businessman, the MSME sector, the small businessman, how could we deal with the GST when he had no idea of computers, when he had to hire people for which he wouldn't have the means to pay for, unless that system is put in place. You can't have a massive structural reform. Remember that. Therefore, like when you build a building, you build it brick by brick, right? If you try to build a building overnight, it'll fall down.
So what you're trying to say, basically, they're building the building overnight, and also they're building the top floors first and not the foundation first.
Exactly. And they're not listening to people at the bottom of the pyramid.
That's a very interesting take, sir. But I also want to ask you, as a principal opposition of the country, any democracy needs an opposition, and whether people support the Congress party in its ideology or not, I think all young people and people just generally need an opposition in order for the democracy to survive. So in 1984, the Congress had approximately, if I'm not wrong, a 49.1% vote share, and now it's fallen to about 19.6%. And so for the Bharatiya Janata Party, it's moved up from 2 seats in 1984 to almost about 50+% now. So in Maharashtra, you've been reduced almost to the third partner, and there are people in Mumbai who are writing to the party, to the top brass of your party, and saying that they're not even included in the political process. So the party that was known for a Hindutva ideology, and in most cases something that you've opposed in terms of ideology. Liberal-minded young Indians across, both in India and outside India, of the Indian diaspora, they've been looking for an answer, looking for a political party to look up to. But sir, the credibility of the Indian National Congress seems to be far weakened to what it used to be in its heydays and during the 47 and the freedom struggle, sir.
You're telling me what we all know.
So, but what is going wrong according to you?
You're telling me what we all know, okay? And the fact of the matter is that we believe that, yes, we need some structural changes.
Right, sir.
And some of us have asked the party leadership to deal with those suggestions that we have. We can't discuss the politics of this in public, but I agree with you that the Congress party has never been so weak as it is today, because our numbers in Lok Sabha reflect that fact, and we can't get away from it. But the fact that we have 19% of the vote share even today, right, is not a small number. So what we need to do is reform. What we need to do is build up leadership in the states. What we need to do is to, have processes in place which are constructive in nature, so that right decisions are taken at the right time. All that is necessary, right? Now, how that is to be brought about is something that the party will have to think about, and we have proposed that. But the fact of the matter is, and I agree with you, that the Congress has never been in such a weak position. But if you really look at the map of India, you will realize that there is no regional party which has a national footprint. Congress is still a national party with regional footprints, right? It may have sort of been decimated in some states in the country. But I think that with appropriate decisions been taken, and I think people rightly ask, what are you going to do about it, and that's a genuine concern, because
it's a genuine concern, sir.
People want an opposition, an effective opposition, and unless Congress sort of meets the challenge that is sort of facing us, I don't think we'll be able to provide that opposition. So I think that we are working on it, and I'm sure that in the time to come, we'll find that we will have taken appropriate steps to build that opposition.
So at the risk of probing a little more, the party that stood for liberal constitutionalism, so your party is for young people who look up to the ideology of a liberal secular state which is echoed by majorly your party and its party leaders. So they find sometimes, and this I'm only echoing some young sentiment, where they find that the deserving candidates in your party who are youth leaders, so to say, the likes of a Milind Devra in Bombay, a Sachin Pilots in Rajasthan, and a Jyotiraditya Scindia who is now moved to the Bharatiya Janata Party, they're not as rewarded as, say, their counterparts who are much younger in the Bharatiya Janata Party and other major political parties across. And to give an example of Tejasvi Surya or Mimi Chakraborty, new parliamentarians who are below the age of 35 and also given more central roles to play in the party. So do you think that young people should also be further?
So I think that this is a very sort of, it's not a fair debate. I'll tell you what. If you look around the world,
right, sir,
you look at any party in India, right? Who are the young people who control the party? Who is young? BJD is controlled by a young person. Prakash Singh Badal, who of course gave up his presidency, was he young at any point in time when he was, controlling the Akali party, right? And if you really party after party, you will find that people. Nitish Kumar is not young. So the point is that every political party must have an assimilation of a cross section of people.
Of course.
Young,
of course,
experienced, right? It's only the experienced who then ultimately drive the young to become experienced.
So there's no substitute for experience. There's no substitute for experience. Don't get me wrong on that part.
Right. So there's no substitute for experience. And if you really look at every political party, including the BJP,
right,
you will find that it is the experience of Mr. Modi in Gujarat that has brought him to Delhi. Right. It's not sort of young being catapulted to power. Yes, individuals may have grievances, and people may have ideas about some young people, but political parties don't function like that, right? I think there are a lot of young people. After all, Sachin Pilot was the deputy chief minister of Rajasthan, right? And you tell me any political party in India who's had such a young person as deputy chief minister, and then to say that we do not, we don't prioritize the young, or we sort of, don't recognize that. This is not correct. I mean, Jyotiraditya Scindia was a cabinet minister in the government. was a minister in the government in charge of power. He was young. There are lots of young people who were in government in the Congress party. Milind Deora was my minister of state.
I am aware. And he speaks very highly
So,
of you whenever we
for,
speak.
for us, for anybody to criticize the Congress party for not recognizing the young is contrary to the facts. And to say that the oldies are oldies and therefore they have to be discarded doesn't make sense, because it's with the experience of people that ultimately you build political parties. So I think everybody has to play a role, and that's how any party should move forward.
Let me take you to another very contentious issue. It's the 71st Republic Day of our country, and the values that are mentioned in the Constitution. You are one of India's topmost lawyers. You've been the additional Solicitor General of the country. So what I wanted to ask you is this: there are certain things in the Constitution that have been challenged more now than ever. So we see this across both in media and even otherwise. And young India is also growing more politically conscious. Like you saw with the CA and the NRC, it was young people who were both for and against and at the helm of both those movements. So the idea of India that was promoted by Ambedkar and Gandhiji, in the humble opinion of a lot of young people, seem to have died down in the fact that they are not now in the political mainstream. So what is today's Congress's ideology as compared, and is there any difference in comparison to today's ideology of the Indian National Congress as compared to, say, in 1947?
See, look, it's like this. The nature of politics has changed over the years. The nature of the country has changed. And I think it's much to do with the communications revolution. So you can't think in terms of Nehru's and Gandhi's, Nehru's India, right? And Patel's India, and Shastri's India, and Indira's India, in terms of Modi's India, right? There's a world of a difference between the two. And I think what's really happened is that the communications revolution has changed it all. You can now assess the quality of a politician by, having a program like this and showing it to thousands of people, right? Mainstream media has reached every household in the country, right? So politicians are not judged by the speeches they make with crowds sitting half a kilometer away, like it used to happen, right? Politicians are judged by what they say, how they say it, the manner they say it, right? And the wisdom of their words in the drawing rooms and in the small little, jhoparis in every village in this country, right? So the nature of politics has changed. Okay, so you can't compare Nehru's India to Modi's India. That's number one. Number two, because of the power of the state today and the power of technology, right? You can get data about people that you could never get before, right? So that's changed. That's changed. Number three, this particular dispensation, that is Modi's India, since 2014, has what it has done is it has sought to control institutions, right? And they have now a formula to win elections. What is that formula? Let's be very candid about it. That formula is the majority people comprise 80% of India, right? They believe they don't need the minority, right? So what are the emotive issues that they can exploit to gain the confidence of the majority, right? And it has become us versus them, right? And this is the politics of the this was also the politics of Trump. This is the politics of many heads of state in the country, in the world. Okay. Now, once you do that, the problem arises, and you do that how? By saying, he's a liberal. He wants to support even the rights of the disadvantaged, be they Dalits or members of the minority community. So these are guys who are anti-majority. That's the kind of discourse, right? So if you have a liberal ideology and you propagate a liberal ideology, then you are pro-X, pro-them, right? And if you propagate, if you propagate a majority ideology, right, then you are pro-us. Okay, now that's the truth. You know, very few people want to tell the truth in this country. So they have this formula: one, make it us versus them in politics.
Right.
Control all mainstream media.
Right.
And how do you control mainstream media? Industry owns mainstream media. Industry needs favors from government on a daily basis, right? So control mainstream media and ensure that that message of the us reaches every village, right? And no other message reaches any village.
Correct.
Right? Now, when that happens, and industry through electoral bonds funds that party which is in power. So this is this very vicious nexus that you have. Now, in this context, if you say what is Congress's ideology,
Correct.
Congress's ideology cannot change. Congress ideology is for all. It's neither for us nor for them. It is for all. And that should remain for all.
And let me take you to the last question, and this is a little more, this is the more jovial, easygoing part, because it's not a political interview. It's not on one of the news channels. But I wanted to ask you this: what is the first thing that comes to your mind when I say the following words? So the very first thought that crosses your mind when I say Indian Constitution.
Been decimated. Values of the Constitution have been decimated.
Article 370.
It was a dead letter before it was repealed.
The Bharatiya Janata Party.
It's not Bharatiya at all. Bharatiyata is inclusiveness and is not for the Janata, but it is a party. And it's having a ball.
Oh goodness! If this was a news interview, this would have made headlines. But sir, when I say Jyotiraditya Scindia, what's the first thing that comes to your mind?
He wanted, space for himself.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi.
He thinks he'll be Prime Minister forever.
When I say TRP, what is the first thing that comes to your mind?
The nation wants to know.
Oh, I was hoping for a more direct answer, but this is as direct as it gets. But and when I say the youth of our country, what's the first thought that comes to your mind?
They must rise to the occasion. It's time for them to speak up. They should have the India they want.
The second last word, when I say India, what's the first thought that comes to your mind?
All of us.
And when I say India's international movement to United Nations or IIMUN, what's the first thought that comes to your mind, sir?
You.
I'm sweet. I'm very sweet, sir. But it's so very many young people, not just me. So it's not Rishabh Shah, but many young people. And as long as we have the experience of people such as you guiding us and giving us insights as to what is happening, what young people can do, and what is the path that many should take, I think the organization is in safe hands and trying to do its little bit without ruffling too many feathers on either side.
No, you're doing fabulously well, and I congratulate you for it.
And I know you're taking out time and doing this in the middle of so very many things that you are already, the hats that you're donning. And therefore, on behalf of the 20,000 plus students who work at the organization and the 1 crore whom we impact, and the thousands who are currently watching this, Mr. Kapil Sibal, it's been a pleasure, sir, to be able to do this with you. Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much. All the best for the new year to all of you.
Thank you, Mr. Kapil Sibal and Rishabh, for that insightful talk. We are honored and truly humbled to have you all here with us today. I hope all of you enjoyed this conversation. I can already see the comment section is filling up, but now it's time to have our own conversations. So let's return back to our committee sessions. Good luck, and we look forward to receiving all your impactful resolutions.